The sun had barely touched the horizon when the royal kitchens began to stir like a hive. Zara moved quickly among the stew pots and mortar bowls, her bare feet blackened by the soot-laced floor, her hands chapped from the countless hours of peeling, grinding, and carrying. Yet her spirit never dulled. Deep within her chest lived something untamed, a laugh so vibrant it could crack silence like thunder. She had learned to swallow it. The older servants had warned her early. "You don't laugh here, girl. You smile with your eyes and nothing more." So Zara had buried her laugh beneath layers of silence, nodding when spoken to, pressing her lips tight when mirth rose within her. But sometimes in the dark of night she would let it out softly, curled near the storage room's back wall, a song-like laugh that spiraled into the ceiling beams like a bird freed from its cage. Tonight was the grand ancestors' feast, a formal palace dinner held once every harvest cycle. Nobles, priests, and military commanders flooded the great hall in their dyed robes and gold-threaded turbans. Servants moved like shadows, refilling goblets, adjusting chair angles, lifting dishes so rich their scent made Zara's stomach coil in longing. She had been assigned to the corner of the hall to assist the main servers, invisible as always, but within earshot of the honored voices. The hall glowed with lantern light and ceremonial fire. Long tables lined with roasted yam, spiced goat, cassava rolls, and honeyed melon made Zara's nose dizzy. She was careful, cautious. But joy flickered quietly behind her ribs, a tiny thrill to simply witness the world that was not hers. That was when Lady Duma, a high noblewoman, rose to toast. "May the spirit of our most ancient ancestor, the venerable and fearless Baba Katunga, continue to bless our harvests." A cheer rose. Cups clinked. Then Lady Duma added, in a booming voice that shook her necklace of cowrie shells, "And may we never forget the wisdom of Baba Katongo." Zara froze. Had she heard that right? Katongo. Not Katunga. It sounded silly. Foolish even. Like a village nickname for a lazy goat. In her mind, she saw an old man with wobbly legs chasing flies from his stew. And before she could stop it, it happened. A bubble of laughter escaped her lips, pure and sharp and melodic. It danced across the hush. It was not loud. But in the hall of formal silence, every ear caught it. Every eye turned. Zara clasped her hand over her mouth too late. "Who laughed?" a commander barked. Zara lowered her gaze. Her heart thudded against her ribs like a frightened drum. A servant nearby stepped aside, revealing Zara. She wanted to melt into the stone floor. The Queen Mother, tall, robed in indigo and ivory, her eyes sharp as obsidian, stood slowly. "You," she said, voice like a dagger unsheathing. "What amusement did you find in Lady Duma's words?" Zara fell to her knees. "I meant no." "You meant to mock nobility," the Queen Mother cut in. "You will be reminded of your place." Two guards appeared as if from the shadows. "No," Zara whispered. "Please?" But no one heard her anymore. She was dragged from the hall. And as the noble guests turned back to their stew and speeches, none noticed the echo of her laugh still hanging in the high beams like a ghost refusing to leave. The night air was thick with oil smoke and the scent of crushed peppers as Zara was dragged behind the royal kitchens. Her bare feet scraped the gravel, leaving thin trails of blood and dust. She didn't cry out, not yet. Shame held her tighter than the guards did. The laughter that had once fluttered inside her like a joyful bird now hung limp and broken in her chest. The punishment pit lay just beyond the spice-drying yard, a quiet clearing where mistakes were corrected and obedience reinforced. Here no guest would see. But the servants always knew. They moved more carefully afterward even if they never spoke of it. A post stood at the center of the clearing, worn smooth by time and backs. Zara's arms were yanked up and tied, wrists bound to the wood with coarse rope that bit into her skin. Her chin trembled, not from pain, not yet, but from the sheer silence. Not a word. Not even a warning. Then came the voice of the head cook, old Mama Nyako, emerging reluctantly from the shadows. She held a leather whip with 3 braided ends. Her eyes didn't meet Zara's. "I begged them to let me do it so they wouldn't send the palace guards," she said softly, voice strained. "It would be worse with them." Zara said nothing. "You shouldn't have laughed, child." She flinched as Mama Nyako raised the whip. The first strike tore through the back of her dress and ripped into skin. Fire lanced across Zara's spine. Her knees buckled, but the ropes held her upright. The second landed just beneath the first, and a sharp cry burst from her mouth, more from shock than pain. A thin ribbon of blood slid down to her waist. By the third strike, her body had gone limp with shuddering. Her throat tightened, but she did not scream again. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted iron. And then, Nothing. Mama Nyako stepped back, weeping quietly. Two younger kitchen boys emerged to cut Zara down, their faces averted. They didn't offer her words or hands. They didn't dare. Touching her now would mark them too. Zara crumpled to the ground. A cloth was brought, a thick, black covering. It was fastened over her mouth and tied behind her head like a muzzle. It pressed her lips closed, muffled her breath, and sealed her silence. 1 week, came the whisper of the Queen Mother's attendant, who had arrived just in time to witness the end. She is forbidden to speak or be spoken to. Mama Nyako tried to protest. But how will she? She will listen, the woman said coldly. Let her learn. Zara was lifted like a sack of millet and carried to the kitchen quarters. No one helped. No one even looked at her directly. Not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Her laughter had made her dangerous. If kindness touched her now, it could spread. As Zara lay on the cold stone of the servant dormitory floor, her back open and weeping, the kitchen resumed its quiet rhythm as if she had never existed. Pans clanged. Spices were ground. Orders were barked in low tones. But outside, beyond the spice yard and the punishment pit, someone did watch. From behind a thick wall of flowering vines that wrapped the palace's eastern garden, a figure stood half-shadowed beneath the moonlight. Prince Mosi. His robe was common. His head was uncovered. To any onlooker, he was just another groundskeeper or wandering attendant. But his eyes, deep, unreadable, stayed locked on Zara's crumpled body. He had heard the laugh. It had surprised him, yes. But more than that, it had made him feel something he hadn't felt in years, not since his brother's death, not since his father's illness had begun. It had made him want to laugh too. He watched the cloth tied across Zara's face. He watched the welts on her back. And he did not turn away when others did. In that moment, something changed behind his eyes, not pity, not yet, but interest. And in the careful, quiet world of the palace, interest from a prince could change everything. The sun had barely risen when Prince Mosi stood at the edge of his private chamber, staring into the garden below. He hadn't slept. All night, Zara's laughter echoed through the halls of his mind, not as a memory but as a question. A note out of place in the perfect silence of the palace. Something about it tugged at him, as though he'd forgotten a sound from childhood and only now remembered how much he missed it. He summoned Koji, his most trusted servant, not by rank but by loyalty. Koji had been raised beside Mosi since they were boys. He understood his prince's silence better than most understood words. Find out about the girl, Mosi said, eyes still fixed on the garden. The one who laughed. Koji blinked, surprised. Zara? The kitchen girl? Not her role. Her story. Koji bowed and vanished without another word. By sunset he returned, cloaked, dusty, eyes alert. She is from the village of Njili, he said. Taken 4 seasons ago when raiders swept through the river valley. She was found half dead under a broken cart, her sister gone, parents killed. Mosi sat quietly. The name Njili sparked something, an old song, a lesson from his grandmother. They believe in laughing spirits there, don't they? He asked. Koji nodded. Yes. In their tradition, laughter is sacred. They say it connects the soul to the divine. Children are taught to laugh before they learn to walk. It's said to heal sickness, banish sorrow, and protect against evil. Mosi leaned back, lips parting just slightly. What else? She was known for her voice. Not just laughter, she sang, told stories, made the elders weep and laugh in the same breath. Her grandmother was a village priestess, a keeper of the laugh. Mosi smiled. Not a full smile, not yet, but the corner of his mouth rose, faint and strange, like a new shoot pushing through dry soil. Koji hesitated. They whipped her hard. She's been silent for a week. The cloth is still on her mouth. I saw. Koji paused again. Why are you interested? Mosi didn't answer directly. Instead, he stood and moved to a carved wooden chest. From it he drew a small flute, dusty, long and used. He turned it in his hand. There was once a time I was allowed to laugh, he murmured. Before everyone started dying or preparing to die. Koji said nothing. He knew what the prince meant, the disease that rotted the king's bones, the brother who had drowned in the dry season, the weight of responsibility that settled on Mosi's shoulders far too early. She reminded me of something, Mosi continued. Not just joy. Defiance. Life. He turned toward Koji with an intensity that was rare. Bring her to the Garden of Echoes. After midnight. No guards. No kitchen staff. No word to the Queen Mother. Koji's brow furrowed. If she's caught. She won't be. And if I'm caught, I'll say I needed a fool to entertain me. Koji tilted his head. You? Needing entertainment? Exactly. No one would believe it. That makes it safe. Later that night, after the palace had folded into darkness and the halls quieted beneath layers of stone and moonlight, Zara sat on her thin straw mat in the corner of the servant quarters, her mouth still bound, her back still aching. She had begun to think the silence would swallow her completely, that her voice, once a wild drum of joy, had been buried too deep to reach. Then Koji appeared. He knelt beside her, careful, quiet. He held a length of blue cloth, softer, finer, and a bowl of warm water. I was told to bring you, he whispered, beginning to untie the mouth binding. Her eyes widened. Only for a little while. To the garden. The prince wishes to hear you. Not your apology. Your story. She blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. No one had spoken to her in 7 days. No one had even met her eyes. Koji gently unfastened the knot and pulled the binding free. Zara gasped softly, tasting air on her lips as if for the first time. I don't have anything left to tell, she rasped. Koji dipped the cloth and pressed it to her lips. Then perhaps you'll remember it in the garden. And with that, they slipped into the corridor, two shadows drifting past stone columns and sleeping guards, toward the one place in the palace where laughter had not yet been forbidden. The Garden of Echoes was unlike the rest of the palace. It pulsed with quiet life. Tucked behind the eastern wing and walled in by high hedges, it had once been built for the king's first wife, a woman who spoke only in songs. Every sound that entered the garden lingered just a little longer than it should, as though the stones themselves listened. Zara stepped cautiously through the arched gate, led by Koji's quiet hand. The grass was cool beneath her feet, the petals of the night-blooming flowers shivered under the breeze. The air smelled of earth and jasmine. Moonlight spilled across the winding paths like silk. And there, beneath an old baobab tree at the heart of the garden, stood Prince Mosi. He wore no crown. No silk. Just a plain tunic, his feet bare in the grass. A single lantern glowed beside him, casting long shadows that danced across his face. Zara froze. Everything in her screamed to run. But something in his eyes, not pity, not hunger, just quiet curiosity, held her still. He nodded once at Koji, who stepped back and vanished into the shadows, leaving them alone. You may speak, Mosi said gently. Zara touched her lips, still tender. Why? Because I want to hear you, he said. Not just your voice. You. She hesitated. I don't think I have much left to say. Mosi sat at the base of the tree and gestured for her to join him. Then don't speak. Tell me a story. Zara stood silently for a moment, then moved toward him and slowly sat, wincing as her back brushed the bark. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse but steady. In my village, when a child laughs before they speak, we call them starborn. It means the ancestors left something behind in them, something old, wild, sacred. My grandmother said I came out laughing. Mosi leaned forward, intrigued. She was the keeper of the laugh. Every week, she'd gather the children and tell tales, but she'd always twist the ending to make us laugh. She said that laughter bent grief like heat bends iron. Zara smiled faintly, remembering. There was one tale she told every year. About a crocodile who wanted to learn to sing. Mosi chuckled. A crocodile? He was tired of being feared. He wanted joy. So he left the river and joined the forest birds. But every time he opened his mouth to sing, the birds flew away. Zara's voice began to soften, almost musical now. So he begged the wind to carry a tune into his throat. The wind agreed, but only if the crocodile made one creature laugh. He tried everything, jokes, dances, even painting his scales. But no one laughed. She paused, her eyes twinkling. Until one day he sneezed so loudly that a monkey fell out of a tree. Prince Mosi let out a startled laugh, a genuine, sudden sound, sharp and light. Zara beamed. And the monkey said, "That's the ugliest music I've ever heard, but it's still better than silence." Mosi laughed harder, head tilted back. It echoed across the garden walls and into the night air. Zara's heart thudded in wonder. No one had ever joined her laugh. They had silenced it, feared it, punished it. But here was the prince, a man raised on silence and duty, laughing without shame. He looked at her with a warmth that softened the lines of his face. I haven't laughed like that since my brother was alive, he said quietly. He used to pretend he was a frog during dinner just to make me choke on my soup. Zara smiled, but a shadow passed over her expression. You shouldn't be seen with me, she murmured. I know. There was a long silence, not empty but full, of understanding. Of something just beginning. They stayed there, side by side beneath the baobab, the lantern flickering low, neither needing to speak again. But behind the vine-covered trellis just beyond the wall, someone had been watching. Amaya, a palace maid with clever fingers and a bitter heart, had followed Koji from the servant quarters. She had suspected something ever since she saw the prince glance once, just once, in Zara's direction weeks ago. Her lips curled as she backed away from the wall, her breath quick with excitement. She didn't understand why the prince laughed with that low-born girl, but she didn't need to. All she needed to know was that the queen mother would be furious. And in the palace, fury was always rewarded. The next morning dawned with a thick, uneasy stillness. The palace buzzed with a quiet hum, not the usual rhythm of chores and duty, but something colder, watchful. Whispers moved faster than servants. Eyes darted. Back stiffened. Zara didn't know why she'd been seized until they dragged her into the inner court. The queen mother was already waiting, seated on her high carved stool in the center of the circular stone chamber. She wore the crown of adjudication, a simple silver circlet she reserved only for punishment rituals. Her face was unmoved, carved from the same granite as the steps beneath her. Zara was thrown to her knees on the cold floor. Around her, nobles stood in a ring, their faces blank as stone masks. 2 guards stood behind her, spears crossed behind her back. Amaya stood beside the queen mother, her eyes gleaming. She was found in the prince's private garden just before dawn, the maid said sweetly. No servant enters there without invitation. She sat beside him, told stories to charm him. I heard them laugh together. The queen mother turned her piercing gaze to Zara. Did you touch him? No, Zara replied, her voice calm but unflinching. Did you tempt him? Zara's lips curled into something small, almost a smile. No. The queen mother's voice sharpened. Then why did he laugh? Zara blinked. Because he wanted to. A murmur passed through the ring of nobles. This is how empires rot, the queen mother said coldly. From small cracks. A servant with a pretty voice, a prince with a soft heart. Laughter where there should be silence. She rose slowly. Let her be taken to the salt mines. Let her laughter be swallowed by dust. Zara didn't flinch. Her knees ached. Her back still bore the memory of lashes. She looked up at the queen mother, meeting her eyes, not in defiance but in something deeper. Then quietly, unmistakably she laughed. It wasn't wild. It wasn't joyful. It was soft, like water running over stone. But it was pure. A single note that rose into the air, gentle as breath. The queen mother's hand froze mid-gesture. Silence fell over the court. Then, from the circle of nobles, an old man stepped forward. He was thin, with silver-painted cheeks and a necklace of river stones. A spiritual advisor, one of the king's oldest companions. He dropped to his knees, shaking. Did you hear it? He whispered. That melody, it is not rebellion. No one answered. It is the laughing song of the ancients. His eyes were wide with tears. I have not heard it since I was a boy at the Temple of Roots. The queen mother's brow furrowed. Superstition. It is sacred, he cried. In the old tongue, they say the gods themselves taught the laugh to mortals to remind them not to take power too seriously. A few nobles shifted, uncertain. Fear and awe rippled through the room like wind through long grass. At that moment, the great doors of the court slammed open. Prince Mosi strode in, breathless, face flushed from running. He glanced at Zara, then at his mother. Stop. You are too late, the queen mother said stiffly. She is under my protection, Mosi said. You have no right to exile a girl for a laugh. The queen mother turned toward him slowly. She entered your garden. She broke rules meant to preserve order. She corrupted you. No, he said, his voice rising. She reminded me I am still human. The queen mother's lips curled. You think laughter makes you strong? She hissed. A ruler who laughs is not feared. Then let them fear me after they hear me laugh. For a moment nothing moved. Then Mosi stepped toward Zara, breaking the circle. He stood beside her, then held out his hand. But Zara didn't take it yet. She looked around the room at the people who had mocked her silence, ignored her pain, and feared her joy. And she laughed again, louder this time. Clear. Wild. Sacred. It bounced from the dome above and fell back like rain. Some gasped. A few backed away. And at the edge of the circle, someone, a young noblewoman, laughed back before catching herself. The queen mother's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. Later that day, the official records would show Zara was pardoned due to cultural significance. But those who had heard her laugh would remember it differently. They would say a girl, bruised and bound, laughed in the face of exile, and the gods for the first time in a generation laughed with her. The journey to the salt mines took 5 days. They moved under a burning sun, through dry ravines and ghost forests where the wind spoke in long groans. Zara rode in a covered cart, not as a prisoner but not quite as a guest either, escorted by guards who never met her eyes. She didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The laughter that had shaken the court still trembled inside her chest, but now it echoed against the silence of exile. When they reached the white waste, the world had turned pale. Endless plains of salt stretched like a frozen sea. The sun reflected off the cracked ground so fiercely it made the eyes water, the skin blister. Here voices disappeared into the air. No birds. No trees. No sound but the crunch of boots and the dry cough of wind. The salt mines weren't truly mines, not anymore. They were wide flats where condemned workers scraped salt with curved blades, shoving it into baskets and barrels that would be shipped to the royal coastlines. The work bent backs and burned skin. The air tasted like metal and dust. Zara was given a cot in a low wooden hut with no windows, shared with 5 other women. No names were exchanged. Eyes only flicked in brief recognition. Pain lived here, and silence wrapped itself around the shoulders of every exile like a shawl they could never take off. On her first morning, a tall, hollow-eyed woman named Binta handed her a blade and pointed toward the flats. Zara joined the line. Under the punishing sun she scraped in rhythm, left, scrape, lift, right, scrape, dump. It didn't take long before her fingers bled. By the 3rd day her muscles screamed. Her lips cracked. Still she said nothing. But on the 4th day something strange happened. She dropped her blade to adjust her wrap, and the woman next to her, a round-faced exile with burn scars across her arms, let out a tiny whistle. It was almost nothing, just 2 short notes. Zara looked up sharply. The woman didn't look at her. But a moment later the whistle came again. This time with a 3rd note. Then silence. That night in the hut, Zara approached her. The others were asleep or pretending to be. That whistle, she whispered. What was it? The woman, whose name turned out to be Marwa, shrugged. Old habit. My mother used to call the goats that way. Zara smiled faintly. Felt like a song. Marwa glanced at her, surprised. Haven't thought of music in years. Out here, the wind steals your voice before you can use it. Zara looked down at her blistered hands. Then maybe we use the wind instead. That night, the 2 women practiced, soft whistles, low hums, rhythmic clicks of their tongues. Small things. Unnoticeable things. Zara shaped them into patterns, remembered stories her grandmother had told, mapped melodies from laughter long buried. She began to teach coded sequences. Joy was 3 quick whistles and a pause. Hope was a slow hum followed by 2 taps. Within a week, 4 women in their hut were whispering wind songs under their breath as they worked. By the end of the month, the soundless flats had begun to change. It started with rhythm, the exiles dragging their salt baskets in sync, moving like dancers in slow motion. Then came patterns, clinks of metal tools creating cadence, footsteps echoing like a drumbeat. Even the guards noticed, though they didn't understand it. They simply said the workers were more efficient now. Easier to manage. But at night, in the huts, the quiet exploded into laughter. Not loud, not foolish, but deep and healing. Zara told stories again. Some sad, some silly. All of them laced with that strange, sacred magic. She had become something more than a worker. More than an exile. She was a leader. One evening, under a moonless sky, a young girl named Temb, no older than 15, crept into Zara's hut and knelt beside her cot. Are you the ghost? She whispered. Zara blinked. What? The guards say there's a ghost who laughs in the salt flats. They hear it at night. They think the mines are cursed now. Zara smiled, laying a hand over the girls. Tell them it's not a ghost. Just someone who remembers what joy sounds like. But the rumor spread faster than she could quiet it. Workers from other camps began whistling in secret. Some told stories of a figure in white walking across the flats, laughing softly in the darkness, a spirit of rebellion, of remembrance. They called her the Laughing Ghost. The name reached farther than she imagined. 2 traders, delivering supplies from the palace, carried the tale back with them. Over cups of palm wine in the city, they told it like myth. They say there's a girl in the mines who makes even the salt sing. And somewhere deep in the palace, in a quiet room lit only by an oil lamp, Prince Mosi sat beside a dusty flute and listened as the story reached his ears. He smiled, not a soft one but full and bright. The ghost lives, he whispered. And the wind carried his words out through the window, over the hills and toward the white wastes. The desert winds howled as Mosi stepped onto the edge of the white wastes, his royal boots dusted white within minutes. He wore no silks, no royal crest, only a traveler's robe, sun-worn and plain, with a broad hood shadowing his face. The air here was dry enough to scrape the throat, and the salt burned in every shallow breath. Still he pressed forward. He was no longer the boy prince who had laughed once under a baobab tree. His jaw had sharpened, his voice deepened. His father, the king, now lay wasting in the upper rooms of the palace, too weak to speak. The queen mother had retreated into silence, her power all but ceremonial. And Mosi was days away from becoming ruler of the kingdom. But first he had to find her. Stories had reached him in waves. Traders, soldiers, whispering nobles, they spoke of a phantom in the salt. A woman who led the broken to joy. A girl who once sang in the palace and now ruled the wind with her breath. They called her a ghost. But Mosi knew better. He spent 3 days moving through the mines, asking no questions, pretending to be a low-born surveyor from the eastern regions. At night he listened, not for voices but for music. On the 4th evening, just as the sky blushed with the bruised colors of dusk, he heard it. A rhythm. Faint, quick. Not footsteps. Not tools. A melody crafted by whistles, footsteps, metal on stone. It came from the far edges of the flats, where the workers were fewer, the guards lazier. There, gathered around a flickering fire of dried brush, a cluster of women swayed in soft unison. At their center stood a figure in white, her head wrapped in linen, her face turned to the stars. She wasn't speaking. She was moving. And every tilt of her head, every snap of her fingers, sent signals through the group like wind through trees. Zara. Even from a distance he knew her. Though her frame had grown stronger, her skin darkened by sun and labor, though she wore the same rough garb as the others, her presence burned brighter than fire. She was leading a song, not with words but with laughter. Small bursts, controlled breaths, passed from person to person in tempo. The sound rose into the sky like birds escaping a net. Mosi stood frozen, overcome. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. When the gathering dissolved and the others returned to their huts, Zara remained, facing the fire. She did not look at him. He stepped closer, quiet. She turned slowly. Their eyes met. He opened his mouth but no words came. She tilted her head slightly, confused. "I'm sorry," he said at last. Her brows furrowed. "Do I know you?" The question struck deeper than expected. He had known she might not remember, it had been nearly 5 years. And he looked different. But something in him ached to be recognized. "I met you once," he said. "In a garden full of echoes." Her face stayed still, unreadable. Then softly he laughed. Not just any laugh, her laugh. That bright, climbing melody she had once let slip in the palace hall. That sound that had cost her everything. It rang clear now in the barren wind. Zara's eyes widened. Her lips parted. And then she laughed too. Wordless. Free. They stood across the fire from each other, not touching, not needing to. The night cracked with the sound of it. Not joy, not just memory, but something sacred rediscovered. When the laughter faded, Zara approached him. "You're the prince." "Not yet," he said. "But soon." She looked away, the firelight casting shadows across her cheekbones. "So what do you want, Mosi?" "Forgiveness." "No," he said. "I came for something harder." Her gaze narrowed. "I want you to come back." She stepped back instinctively, shaking her head. "To that place," she said. "To the people who beat me? Silenced me?" "Not to serve them," Mosi said. "To teach them." Zara said nothing. "The palace has grown quiet. Afraid. It is full of people who bow and whisper but forget how to breathe," he continued. "They fear joy because it cannot be controlled. But what if laughter was not disobedience? What if it was law?" She studied him. "You want to make laughter a law? I want you to teach it again. In the open. In your voice. Not in secret." She turned her face to the horizon. The moon had begun to rise. A wind pulled across the flats and the salt shimmered like frost. "What makes you think they'll listen?" "Because I will be king. And I will be the first to learn." Zara didn't answer right away. She bent to stir the fire, then stood again, her back straight. "Then don't call me a ghost," she said quietly. "Call me your teacher." Mosi smiled. "Agreed." As they walked back to the hut side by side, a few workers peered from doorways, murmuring. Word would spread fast. The ghost had been found. And this time she would not vanish into the wind. This time she was coming home, not in shame but in power. The royal banners fluttered above the great hall, their deep purples and golds swaying like slow-moving fire. Sunlight filtered through the high arched windows, glinting off polished silver and carved ivory. The long dining table gleamed, set with roasted plantains, honeyed lamb, and gem-bright fruits arranged like jewels. It was the grand ancestors' feast, the same feast that had once sealed a girl's fate. Only this time the girl walked in through the front doors. Zara entered dressed in white, not the dusty linen of the salt flats, but a flowing robe stitched with lines of black and gold thread that shimmered with every movement. Her head was uncovered. Her curls, freshly oiled and braided, framed a face that had grown stronger, bolder. She did not bow. She did not glance down. And yet, the hall fell silent at her arrival. Nobles blinked in disbelief. Some whispered. Others stiffened. She had become myth, the laughing ghost, the exile of the white wastes. Most assumed she died. Those who knew better never expected to see her at court again. But here she was. Prince Mosi rose from his seat at the head of the table, dressed in ceremonial blue trimmed with crimson. He extended his hand without a word. Zara walked straight to him and took it. Gasps fluttered across the hall like startled birds. He led her to the high table, to his table, and seated her beside him. The Queen Mother sat a short distance away, rigid as stone. She hadn't spoken since the announcement. Her face was unreadable, her lips tight, her eyes carefully blank. But her silence thundered. Servants moved like shadows. Music played softly from a distant alcove. And then, as protocol demanded, the toasts began. One by one, elders and nobles stood, raising goblets to the ancestors, to the throne, to the future. Then Lady Duma, older now, her once lustrous hair threaded with gray, stood with her usual pomp and pride. "May the wisdom of Baba Katunga guide this kingdom into peace," she declared. "And may his name never be forgotten." A polite murmur of approval moved through the room. Then Mosi stood. All eyes turned to him. He raised his goblet, calm, steady. "To the wisdom of our honored ancestor." He paused just long enough to draw breath. "Baba Katongo." A beat of stunned silence. Gasps echoed. Someone choked on their wine. Mosi kept a straight face for half a second longer, and then he burst out laughing. The room froze. It was not a polite chuckle. It was real, sudden, joyous, deep from the belly. Loud and alive. Zara looked at him. And before fear could set in, before silence could return like a noose, she joined him. Her laughter spilled out like a river let loose, bright and melodic, wrapping itself around his, weaving together into something bold and beautiful. She didn't ask permission. She didn't hesitate. It was a laugh that did not hide, did not shrink. The court held its breath. And then, slowly, impossibly, another laugh joined. A young noblewoman at the far table, trying to suppress it and failing. Then a steward. Then an elder with tears in his eyes. And then the dam broke. Laughter surged through the hall, hesitant at first, then rolling, overlapping like waves on stone. It wasn't mockery. It wasn't disorder. It was release. For years, the palace had been tight-lipped, afraid to crack the facade of control. But now, in that moment, something unspoken gave way. Even Lady Duma chuckled, despite herself. Only the Queen Mother remained unmoved, staring straight ahead, fingers gripping the carved arm of her chair. Mosi turned to Zara, still catching his breath. "Do you think the ancestors mind?" She wiped a tear from her eye. "If they heard that? I think they're laughing with us." He nodded, then rose again, signaling for silence. The room quieted, not instantly but warmly, like a song finishing its final note. "I stand here not just as your future king," Mosi said, voice clear, "but as a man who once feared laughter, who thought joy was a weakness. I was wrong." He looked at Zara. "This woman taught me otherwise. She was punished for reminding us of something sacred. Today she returns not in chains but in honor." He extended his hand again. Zara rose slowly, breath steady. "Zara of Njili," Mosi continued, "will now serve as our court-keeper of joy, a role not held in generations. She will lead the chorus of echoes, teach the children, heal the broken, remind the stiff-necked that even power must laugh or it will rot." Cheers rose. Zara stood tall, a flicker of disbelief still in her eyes, but only for a moment. Then she bowed deeply, not in submission but in ceremony. And when she straightened, her laughter returned, soft now like a promise. That night, for the first time in royal memory, the grand ancestors' feast ended not with final prayers, but with music and dancing. And the palace remembered how to breathe. They did not know it then, but songs would be written of that evening. Children would reenact it in village squares. Some would call it rebellion. Others would call it rebirth. But all would remember the laugh that changed everything. And the girl who dared to laugh first. The coronation took place at dawn, just as the first light touched the marble dome of the Hall of Kings. A new crown, forged with inlaid obsidian and a single clear crystal, was placed upon Prince Mosi's head as drums rolled across the hills and conch shells sounded through the air like thunder. His eyes searched the crowd, but he found Zara not among the nobles, not among the priests. She stood with the children, teaching them how to whistle like birds. He smiled. It was exactly where she belonged. That evening the king held his first royal court. The room was packed, not just with dignitaries and ministers, but with villagers, tradespeople, children, and elders who had traveled miles to witness what they called the Laughing King's first word. Mosi rose from his throne, carved with vines instead of spears, and spoke simply. "I have heard your laughter," he said, "and I have heard your silence. Both deserve respect. But today I give voice to joy." He raised a scroll and unfurled it. "By decree of the throne of this kingdom, let it be known, no sound of joy, no laugh, no song, no story, no whistle of delight, shall ever again be punished on royal land." There was a collective intake of breath across the court. In every home, village, and hall, children shall be taught not only to read and count, but to laugh. Let the stern learn softness. Let the sorrowful remember. He looked toward Zara, standing now with a small boy on her hip. "We will remember that joy is not weakness but wisdom." He turned to the herald and added, "And let it be written that a new roll shall forever be held in this court, a roll older than memory, forgotten too long." He nodded toward Zara. "The keeper of laughter." Zara stepped forward, her steps unhurried, her eyes bright. She wore her village white, woven with thread dyed from ash and berry. Around her neck hung an old carved pendant, one she'd taken from her grandmother's burnt house the day she was orphaned. She bowed only once. And when she rose, the king stepped aside and she spoke. "In Njili," Zara said, "we say the body is not fully grown until it has learned to laugh without shame. My grandmother taught me that joy is not a trick. It is a weapon against silence." She raised her hand and clapped 3 times, slow and rhythmic. From the balconies, a group of children echoed her clap, then whistled a sharp, rising tune, one of the old codes from the mines. The hall broke into soft laughter. Even some of the nobles joined. Zara smiled and turned to Mosi. "The salt may take voices," she said, "but joy always returns." As the court was dismissed and the night began to fall, the castle shifted in unseen ways. Guards cracked jokes. Pages laughed in the halls. Cooks hummed while stirring their pots. Laughter, once feared, had become contagious. And in her chamber, the Queen Mother sat at her tall window watching the moon rise. She said nothing, but beside her, a small music box turned, and she let it play all the way through without closing the lid. At the end she smiled, barely, at a memory long buried. She didn't laugh, not yet. But she was listening. In the weeks that followed, Zara took her role seriously. She held open circles beneath the baobab trees, teaching noble children and village girls alike how to tell stories, sing without notes, and laugh from the belly. She rewrote ancient riddles into songs. She taught the court that laughter was not disruption, it was rhythm. One day, while reading through scrolls in the palace archives, she stumbled upon an old, crumbling fragment written in faded ink. The sacred laughter of Njili, first chosen to train the jesters of kings, for only they knew how to bend pain into performance and truth into tune. "Let none harm a laugh-keeper, for their gift is divine." Zara sat back stunned. Her village, the one erased by raiders, forgotten by history, had once been the royal laughter school. What they'd called foolishness had once been sacred. She brought the scroll to Mosi. He read it twice, then looked up with wonder. "It was never rebellion," he whispered. "It was tradition." Zara grinned. "And now it's law." He laughed, and so did she. And high above them, carved into the new palace gate for generations to come, the law would be etched in both the old tongue and the new. Let there always be space for joy. Let laughter walk beside the throne. The courtyard rang with the sounds of bells, soft ones tied to tree branches, heavy bronze ones hung low for children to strike, tiny reed chimes woven into flower baskets. Their notes fluttered through the warm air like the wings of butterflies. In the center of it all sat Zara, cross-legged on a sun-warmed mat, her robe now the color of honey and dusk. Her hair, streaked with gray, was woven in long, confident braids that reached her waist. Around her gathered a half-circle of children, some in palace blue, others barefoot in village wraps, none of them old enough to remember the days before laughter had been law. She was telling a story, not from parchment but from memory. Her voice was calm but alive, every sentence bending into rhythm like a dance. And so the crocodile, tired of being feared, tiptoed into the bird's nest and whispered, "May I borrow your voice just for one morning?" The children erupted into giggles. A boy with painted cheeks clapped, and one of the tree bells jingled in response. From a shaded bench nearby, an old noblewoman smiled quietly, knitting a child's tunic. A young guard leaned against a pillar, shaking his head in mock disbelief at the story's absurdity. This courtyard, once a training yard for silent pages and rigid tutors, had become the hall of echoes. No walls, no gates, just shade, warmth, and sound. And Zara, the woman once whipped for laughing, now its keeper. A small girl, no older than 5, raised her hand with hesitant fingers. "Miss Zara," she said, "is laughter magic?" Zara smiled, touched the girl's chin gently. "No, little one. Laughter is memory made loud." The girl blinked. "What kind of memory?" "The kind the world tries to bury," Zara said. "But that comes back up, like roots, like a song you forgot you knew." A hush fell over the circle, the good kind, not of fear but reflection. Then one of the boys struck a bell gently with a carved stick, and the rhythm began again. The children began clapping, stomping, singing the lines Zara had taught them, part lesson, part lullaby, part spell. Laughter in the pot, laughter in the pan, stir it with your fingers, and shout because you can. Behind the courtyard, beyond the sound of the bells, the palace moved on. Ministers debated policy, priests prepared for harvest rites, and foreign envoys passed through carved gates under royal banners. But even in the throne room now there was sound. King Mosi's court was famous across the region, not for being the richest nor the strictest but for its warmth. Musicians played before council meetings. Children were allowed to question elders in rhyme. Even court trials now began with a moment of silence followed by a joke, a tradition Mosi himself demanded. Many called it strange. Others called it foolish. But the people called it home. And in the quieter parts of the kingdom, the river towns, the market alleys, the hillside shrines, stories about Zara still rolled like wind. She's the one who sang in the mines. She made the queen mother weep without touching her. She taught the king how to breathe again. Some said she never slept, that she lived off joy alone. Others claimed her laugh could still break curses. But Zara herself never claimed any of it. She simply taught. Taught rhythm. Taught breath. Taught grief turned upside down. She stitched the old ways into the new ones, tying the sacred laughter of her village into a future no longer afraid of sound. One evening, long after the children had gone home and the bells had grown still, Mosi came to sit beside her. He no longer wore his crown unless ceremony demanded it. His beard had grown thick. The weight of ruling hung on his shoulders, but it never bent him the way silence once had. "I saw a boy tell a joke to a councilman today," he said. Right in the middle of a speech about taxes. Zara raised an eyebrow. "Did the councilman cry?" Mosi laughed. He clapped. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the leaves shift under the moonlight. "Do you ever miss it?" Mosi asked suddenly. "The garden. That first night." Zara thought for a moment. "No," she said. "Because it never left us. We carried it with us." He nodded and after a long pause stood. "I should go before they send guards to check if I've wandered into the kitchens again." As he walked away, Zara remained seated, her gaze resting on the stars overhead. A wind passed through the courtyard, stirring the smallest bells. And far across the kingdom, elders and villages told the children. There was once a girl who laughed when she shouldn't have. They punished her. And the world changed. Final line. She was whipped for laughing. But the kingdom now sings her joy.